welcome to the Explainer. So today we're tackling a really fascinating paradox, one that sits literally right at the heart of every single workplace, corporation, and government institution out there. We're going to unpack the psychology behind why organizations change, how they learn, and maybe more importantly, why they so stubbornly refuse to adapt. Look, considering up to 70% of massive corporate restructurings and software migrations just completely fail to meet their goals, organizational change is clearly, well, incredibly complex. But the hidden mechanics behind why those changes succeed or fail, they are absolutely mind-blowing. Let's just jump right into it. Okay, let's dive into this with the ultimate dilemma. Think about this. If an organization changes its routines today, are they more or less likely to change them again tomorrow? It seems like a super simple question, right? But this exact dilemma has actually divided management scholars for decades. Because depending on who you ask, you get two completely opposite answers. And honestly, both of them sound perfectly logical. It's this genuine mystery of organizational behavior. To solve this mystery, we're breaking down a brilliant 2022 paper published in the Journal of Change Management by researcher Jun Lee. Now, this journal focuses on reframing leadership and organizational practice. And wow, that is exactly what this research does. It takes two totally opposing academic camps, looks at the hard evidence, and offers a groundbreaking resolution that just totally shifts how we understand organizational momentum. The core dilemma is driven by two perfectly logical but completely contradictory theories. First up, you've got the momentum view. This is kind of the conventional wisdom. It argues that organizations learn to change by changing. You make a change, you build competency, you develop new routines, and boom, you increase the likelihood of doing it again. But countering that is the deceleration view. This camp argues, well, wait a minute. The whole point of changing is to fix your structure. So if your previous changes successfully refined your procedures, you don't really need to change anymore. You've already solved the problem, so the likelihood of future change naturally drops. Two great theories, but totally contradictory predictions. So who's right? Well, to break this deadlock, the author introduces a massive twist. They suggest that, hey, not all changes are created equal. Let's look at the first type, what they call experience changes. Think of this as the raw accumulation of changes. It's an organization frantically searching back and forth, constantly tweaking things just to meet a short-term goal or put out a fire. But here's the absolutely crucial part. Just going through the motions of a change doesn't mean the organization has actually learned a single thing or adopted into their deeper culture. Maybe they're just catering to outside pressure or reacting to some new manager's whims. They are experiencing change, sure, but they definitely aren't absorbing it. Now contrast that with internalized changes. This is the true aha moment for an organization. This happens when a change is internally legitimized, fully embraced by the people doing the work, and locked in as a cornerstone of a real, durable organizational routine. The organization looks back, evaluates the change, and enthusiastically says, yes, this works for us. Internalization is that crucial step that makes it possible for a specific change to be viewed as a truly reliable option for the future. So the crucial point is how the author finally resolves the paradox. It turns out both theories are correct. They just apply to different types of change. The deceleration view, that applies to experience changes. The more an organization just goes through the motions and tweaks procedures to hit a target, the less likely it is to need another change. But the momentum view applies perfectly to internalized changes, because if an organization truly embraces and routinizes a change, they build real competency, making them highly likely to use that routine again. And the truly wild part of all this, both of these dynamics are happening simultaneously within the exact same organization. But how do we know this is actually true outside of an academic textbook? Well, the researcher didn't just sit around theorizing. They went out looking for hard evidence. They dove into a massive data set, tracking the behavior of 477 U.S. local governments. So we're talking counties, cities, towns, and villages. And this is honestly the perfect testing ground. I mean, think about it. Getting a local government to change its established routines is incredibly difficult. You're dealing with multiple stakeholders, endless red tape, and intensely competing interests. This data collection wasn't just a quick snapshot either. It had a massive 25-year scope. Starting way back in 1982 and tracking all the way to 2007, the researchers observed these governments during the rise of what's called the New Public Management era. Basically, this was a huge movement that pushed governments to act a bit more like private businesses, specifically by using a practice called private service delivery, which is basically just outsourcing. The surveys checked in every 5 years, which gives us this incredibly perfect, longitudinal view of exactly how these organizations either adopted or resisted massive operational changes over a full quarter of a century. Over those 25 years, the surveys tracked 67 specific public services. We're talking everyday things like utility meter reading, street repair, running the local library, or park maintenance. The researchers watched to see if a government took a service from in-house delivery and outsourced it to a private contract. But more importantly, they tracked whether the government actually kept it outsourced. If they just outsourced a bunch of random things for a year and brought them back, those were tracked as experienced changes. But if they outsourced a service and stuck with it year after year, fully committing to the decision when they could have easily just abandoned it, well, that was measured as an internalized change. Now, what's really interesting about this is when the researchers finally ran the numbers on over 31,000 observations, the statistical proof is just fascinating. The data perfectly validated the resolution of the paradox. For every single local government, the more raw experience changes they accumulated, the less likely they were to outsource another service. Deceleration was very real. Their procedures were refined enough. But simultaneously, the higher their number of internalized changes, the changes they truly committed to, the more likely they were to outsource another service. So momentum was also incredibly real. The two forces totally coexist, exactly as the theory predicted. All right, let's move into our next section here, predicting future change by looking at operational versus skill relatedness. So now that we understand this dual nature of change, how can leaders actually predict long-term success? Well, the first dimension to look at is operational relatedness. This is when a new potential change shares physical or functional attributes with something you've already internalized. For example, if a city has already figured out the logistics of outsourcing commercial waste, then outsourcing residential waste is highly related. I mean, at the end of the day, trash is trash, right? The working procedures are super similar. This fosters an immediate sense of familiarity and significantly lowers the initial cost and headache of launching a new initiative. Basically, it makes an organization feel safe enough to take the leap. But then we have the second dimension, and this one goes much, much deeper. This is skill relatedness. This isn't just about physical similarity. It's about the deep systemic knowledge, expertise, and what they call absorptive capacity that an organization develops over time. In the study, they measured this by looking at two main things. First, asset specificity, which just means how much specialized investment is required to run a certain service. And second, service measurability, meaning how easy or difficult it is to actually monitor the performance. If an organization internalizes a highly complex, really hard-to-measure change, they build incredibly deep institutional skills. If a new change comes along that requires those exact same systemic skills, that's high-skill relatedness. Let's move to how this builds across time, because honestly, this reveals the most actionable insight of the entire explainer. Look at the short-term effect here. Early on, operational relatedness is highly positive. Organizations are quick to adopt changes simply because they physically look like what they already know. But in that short term, skill relatedness is weak, mostly because those deep skills just haven't had time to form yet. But look at the long-term effect. Over time, operational relatedness actually turns negative. Deceleration kicks in because, well, you just run out of easy, similar things to tweak. But skill relatedness, it becomes strongly positive. Those deep, systemic skills that an organization internalizes, those become the powerful engine that drives real, long-term momentum. So I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question today. Look at your own organization, your own team, or hey, even your own personal habits. When you implement a new initiative, are you actually internalizing it, building those deep skills and truly learning? Or are you simply churning through experience changes, constantly tweaking procedures until you just completely stall out? Because as we've seen, true momentum doesn't come from just making changes. It comes from deeply internalizing them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this framework helps you navigate the complex momentum of your own organizational changes going forward.